So far, so good. Yeah. So yeah, this actually was made in Israel. Can't remember. We got this for VBS like 15 years ago, and I can't remember where we bought it or somebody from church got it. My memory's not that good. But anyways, that's where it came from. So
Made in China.
no, made in Israel. It actually says made in Israel in there. So if it has a sticker, it must be true, right?
China imported Israel.
All right. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for drawing us together again for this study in the book of Judges. We ask you to give us wisdom, to help us to listen well, to convict us of our sin, but all the more to hope in our Savior, our rescuer, Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at Judges chapter 8 in just a minute, but before we do that, I always want to take a few minutes to find out, did you have an opportunity to pray with someone this week who needs Jesus? A conversation with a server at a restaurant, someone on a bus, at the grocery store, something like that. Anybody have a conversation, an opportunity for prayer? Yeah.
Good. It's somebody who owns a, Cook knows him actually, Jeff, owns a Subway that we like to go to. And so I just asked him how he's doing. He said, okay, and said, I'm just gonna go take a short walk. Said, I need a break from my family. And he came back 5 minutes later, he said, well, I got lonesome. He's just, but then he was out again running an errand, and I went out and he wanted to talk. So he was brought up in the Catholic Church. He's from England.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yep.
This is over by Golden, right?
Yeah.
I know this.
He is definitely looking for something. So
Great.
I had the opportunity to share with him. He's grown up with what he thinks is an angry, vindictive God, which is horrible because it's not God. That's not who he is. I said, he's the most loving God. That's why he gave us, his son, Jesus, to die for our sins, because he doesn't want you to feel guilty all the time.
Yep.
He wants you to be happy.
Yep. Great.
So we had this conversation, and he seemed much lighter. But I think he's a person who is definitely looking.
Good. Buy lots of sandwiches, right? That's sandwich ministry, where if you see that person once a week and talk to that individual and pray for that individual, it can make a huge difference in their lives, because people are looking, even if they don't know that. And when we have an opportunity to point them to Jesus Christ, and that's so great what you did. The Spirit led you to focus on what's important. It always comes down to Jesus. Because we can sit there and talk about doctrine and theology and God's anger over sin, and all that's true. But for a person who doesn't know God, pointing them to Jesus Christ is the most important thing. It really is. Somebody else? Anybody else have a conversation, a prayer, interaction with somebody?
There's a guy in our parking lot, actually, Chris. He and his wife or girlfriend having a really tough time. They asked to stay overnight, and I believe Dorothy or Maureen let them. So yeah, we'll put a note on your car, kind of thing. And so I was just praying for him, told him to pray for him, and hope everything in the future he's dealt with honestly, up front, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, like I said on Sunday, there are no human solutions for some problems. But praying for someone and sharing the gospel with someone is a godly solution that has eternal impact. And let's not sell that short. We live in a culture that has really adopted social ministry, social help, and that's good. It's good for our culture. Non-Christians as well as Christians love the idea in general of helping. That's good. But that's all temporary. And what God gives to us in Christ lasts forever. And so we want to share that and point them to the Lord always. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah.
Oh, you got a double.
I had, it was a good week. We, yes, at Rich's doctor's insistence, joined a gym. And so with and there's no reason not to, because we can join free. We have, our insurance
Nice.
gives us free gym membership. And so we also got a session with a trainer. And so in just talking with her after our training sessions, and she said, you just get a conversation, and how are things going? She says, well, okay. And as soon as somebody says okay, you know there's something wrong.
Right.
Well, she has just been, like 33, just been diagnosed with cancer of the lymph node.
Oh boy.
I mean, just been, and then today she learned that her oncologist, who was supposed to be her oncologist, because she doesn't even know what her course of treatment is yet, left. They on a leave of absence, no explanation, just gone. So I told her we would definitely pray for
Mm-hmm. Yep.
her.
Yep.
She's sent an oncologist, and that they're able to.
Yeah. So those are the kind of relationships. So when God puts someone like that in your life, don't ignore that. Sometimes we think we got to get out there and witness to 37 people this week. And most of the time, 1 or 2 people is about all that we can handle well. And when God puts someone like that in our lives, put them on your prayer list, have a piece of paper on your fridge, or tape it to the bathroom mirror, and pray for them every day, and consciously think, what can I do for that person this week? So if I'm at the gym 3 times a week or whatever, maybe once a week, just to say, hey, we're praying for you. Let us know when any developments that come up. That means a lot to people. And as Jesus has cared for us, we can sure care for other people. Okay, so keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. You're doing important work by being out there. You're the front lines. It's not me. People run from me screaming sometimes. So
I didn't mean to do that.
no, usually my family. But what I'm saying is, as a pastor, sometimes people welcome that a lot, and sometimes people are very nervous a lot. And so you're a real person. You're a regular person, and that gives you avenues of access that sometimes I don't have. So use them when God gives them to you. All right, let's take a look at part 4 of Gideon and Midian. We're going to do about half of chapter 8 today, and we'll finish that up next week, and then we'll be about done with Gideon. And it's a very interesting chapter today, or half chapter, and I think you'll find it fascinating. And for all the guys, there's blood and guts, so it's going to be awesome, all right? Okay, so I want to start with a map. Just kind of a reminder, we looked at this last week, but on the map it sort of gives you the whole vision, starting with the battle up here. There's Mount Tabor at the very top, and then you can see the forces come down, the battle happens, and then the red arrows symbolize how Midian is fleeing the battle scene. We talked last week about how the Ephraimites, the tribe of Ephraim, was to seize the fords of Jordan, and so on. And we're going to read about some of these other places and things tonight. So you don't need to worry about, I don't know what that means. You'll see it tonight. Okay? So there's a map. Just give you a basic idea. So they're crossing the Jordan, the ones that were able to, and they're being pursued. That's kind of the context of what we're doing today. Okay. So, Judges 8, 1-3, let's jump in there, where Gideon appeases the tribe of Ephraim. Would someone please read verses 1-3? Tom, you got that?
Now the Ephraimites asked Gideon, "Why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" And they criticized him sharply. But he answered them, "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?" At this, their resentment against him subsided.
Okay, so that's the first passage. So There's been the 300 surround the forces. They blow their shofars much better than I do. They have the torches. Panic ensues. The armies start hacking away at each other, and they begin to flee. And then the tribes of Israel are called out, and they're chasing them. And that's so they get to this point. And Ephraim's been summoned. Hey, take the fords of the Jordan. Don't let them cross over. Obviously, some did, but they stopped many of them. And we'll see how many were killed later on in our text today. Okay, in verse 1, Yahweh had made certain the victory would be his. Just by way of review, how does Yahweh make certain that everyone knows it's his victory?
He only has 300.
That's right. He paired all these soldiers down. What did they have, like 32,000 or something like that at one point? He pairs them all the way down to 300. Obviously, Yahweh is the victor, yet Ephraim wants some of the glory. Hey, how come you didn't call us sooner? We would have been there for you. Why are you dissing us, right? The Ephraimites were very angry, and this could have been a very dangerous situation. Let's remember that the tribes are not exactly unified, and they won't be for some time. And so this is pretty dicey. The Ephraimites, I think we read earlier, they had like 10,000 came out. That's a lot of soldiers. And if they're angry enough, bad stuff happens. Now, verses 2 to 3, Gideon gives a very diplomatic response by magnifying Ephraim while minimizing his own clan. And we can take a look at that in the verses. But he says, hey, the gleanings of Ephraim, so what's left over after the harvest, is more than the whole harvest of Abiezer. Now, what is Abiezer? Well, that's his clan. So let's take a look at Judges 6:11 and Joshua 17:2. Who will read Judges 6:11? Wayne's got that. And who will read Joshua 17, verse 2? Joshua is the book right before Judges. Brian? Okay.
The call of Gideon.
What's that?
I'm starting out. The call of Gideon. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the
Terebinth?
terebinth of Ophrah, which belongs to
Joash?
the Amorites, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites.
Right, so Gideon's, remember, he's threshing grain in a wine press, so no one can see it. And that's his dad's property, Joash the Abiezrite. In other words, he's a guy from the clan of Abiezer. And then Joshua 17, verse 2.
So this allotment was for the rest of the people of Manasseh, the clans of Abiezer, Helek, Asriel, Shechem, Epher, and Shemida. These are the other male descendants of Manasseh, son of Joseph, by their clans.
So Joshua 17 is going back to the inheritance, and they had to figure out, okay, who's from the tribe of Manasseh, and so on, Ephraim, and so on. And so then you've got Abiezer listed as one of the clans. And so Gideon's very diplomatic. He says, hey, you're big. Look at everything you did. You killed, or you got the Oreb and Zeb, the generals. Wow. I mean, what have I done? I've done nothing. And it works, which is a good thing. Now, however, this chapter of Judges introduces the downward spiral of intertribal relations. So remember that the whole book of Judges is a downhill slope. It's just going to get worse. There's no happy ending. I warned you before, and I'm telling you, there's no happy ending in the book of Judges. You have to read the book of Judges in the context of the entire Old Testament and, in fact, the entire Bible. And so what we're seeing now is the beginning of some of the friction between the tribes, and by the end of the book, it's going to be full-blown.
How old's Gideon at this point?
Don't know.
Okay. Couldn't guess.
I could guess, but...
Never mind.
Do it. Yes.
Is there any relationship between this intertribal stuff and some of what's going on today? Even though we hear, say, about some of the countries in the eastern part of the world and the tribes that they have, and our government gets tribes together to talk about stuff, but they never seem to agree.
So you're talking about the Middle East?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is just Israelite tribes.
Oh.
This is only Israelite tribes. So Manasseh is where the clan of Abiezer is in, and the Ephraimites are the ones who are unhappy with Gideon, the Abiezerite. So, yeah, this is just inter-Israelite. But, the reality is it's every group. I mean, remember in the 90s, the Bosnia-Herzegovina, ethnic cleansing? I mean, it's everywhere. How about the United States? Racism abounds. black, white, Asian, Hispanic gangs. It's everywhere. But there is certainly the Middle East is well known for that. But you can look anywhere around the world. How about try Africa? It's funny. People look at the Native Americans, the Indian tribes, and talk about how they were one with the land. Well, you actually read some history, and like they were killing each other, left and right too. So not all of them, of course. Some were peaceful, some were not. People are people, no matter what color their skin is. It's the color of the heart. The human heart is all the same around the world. It's black until God gets in there and does some work. But we're going to see this downward spiral just go all the way to the end of the book. All right, verses 4 to 8. Succoth and Penuel. John, you want to read that?
Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. He said to the men of Succoth, "Give my troops some bread, they are worn out, and I am still pursuing the Zalmunna, the king of the Midian."
Kings
of the Midian. I need new glasses. But the officials of Succoth said, "Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops?" Ooh. Then Gideon replied, "Just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars." Wow. From there he went up to Peniel and made the same request of them. But they answered as the men of Succoth had. So he said to the men of Peniel, "When I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower."
Okay. Yeah, so actually I'm glad you read through verse 9. That's actually good. Probably should say that on our slide here. Okay, so Succoth and Penuel, two towns on the east side of the Jordan. We're going to look at a lot of different towns that we don't really know for sure where they are. These were not famous places like in the book of Acts that continue to be settled. It's dry, it's arid, it's barren. So a lot of them we don't know exactly where they are, but we know they're east of the Jordan and moving south toward the home territory of Midian. All right, verse 4, the 300 men have now become Gideon's personal army. What they went through, if you go, even if you play on sport teams with people and it's intense competition, you bond in that. And if you talk to people who have served in the military and if they served in combat, boy, there is a bond there that is pretty much unbreakable. And so Gideon and these 300 have really been connected by what they've been through, and they stick with him. The verse ends in Hebrew, obviously not English, but in verse 4, Gideon comes and he says, "Hey, I got these," or he doesn't say this yet, but they're coming with him, the 300. And at the end of the verse, it says, they were exhausted yet pursuing. And those words reveal the intensity of Gideon's pursuit. So they're worn out, but they're still going at it. And we're going to find later. Okay, verses 5 to 9. We got resistance to the cause, as I put it here, and John read that for us. Succoth was a significant Old Testament location. So let's read about that. Who will read Genesis 33:17? Somebody there, Becky, great. And who will read Joshua 13:27? Brian's got it. Okay. So we're going to read a couple different verses here as we get into some of the Genesis history, and then, of course, much later, then into Joshua.
And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you."
Is that 33:17?
It is, but it's Exodus.
That's a problem. Because I'm saying Moses is a time traveler. That's impressive. I knew he was great, but that's really awesome.
To me either.
Well, it sounded good. It just wasn't the right application. Okay, so you guys ready for a bad joke?
Okay.
So I didn't ask you. You're standing. So there's this old-time country preacher, and he loved to preach from this giant Bible that was up on the pulpit. It looked very authoritative as he would preach. And the church would be open during the week so people could come and pray. With these two boys in the congregation, they're in grade school, and they're a little bit of troublemakers, and they go in there during the week. And on Sunday, the pastor had said, "Now we're going to keep our study of Genesis going, and we're going to read about the flood in Noah's day in Genesis 6 through 9. And so they go in there during the week, take a little bit of glue, and they glue the 2 pages of the Bible together. And so he starts reading from his Bible and says, and Noah took himself a wife, and she was 200 cubits long, 40 cubits wide. And he looks out at the congregation. He says, I've been reading my Bible nigh into 60 years now, and there's still some things that don't make sense. All right, Becky, let's try again. Genesis 33:17.
Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth.
So Succoth is the Hebrew pronunciation of that. And the reason I kind of push on that a little bit is because it means booths. And so if you have Jewish friends, or you've been around maybe a Jewish calendar you've seen in English, it'd be tabernacles. But a Jewish way would be saying Succoth, and that's plural. It means little shelters. When Peter, James, and John are up with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they see Moses and Elijah hanging out with Jesus, and Peter says, "Let's build 3 shelters." That's probably what he has in mind. It's this is an Israel thing. Let's build some shelters. And so Succoth means shelters. And Jacob, on the way back to meet his brother Esau, and he's worried. He's not sure he's going to make it. If Esau might not kill his whole family, this is what he stops to do. Okay, and then Joshua 13:27. Brian is enjoying reading all the place names that the rest of you are too scared to do.
Here we go. And in the valley, Beth Haram, Beth Nimrah, Succoth, and Zaphon, with the rest of the realm of Sihon, king of Heshbon, the east side of the Jordan, the territory up to the end of the Sea of Kinnereth.
So Kinnereth, the Sea of Kinnereth, is the Sea of Galilee. That's what it's called in the New Testament. And so Sihon, or often we hear pronounced Sihon, king of the Amorites, that's who this is. And that's one of the kings that Moses leads the Israelites against when they're first moving towards the promised land. Sihon is his name, and then Og, king of Bashan, remember him? Those were 2 of the very first kings that the Israelites defeated. And so this is going back to Joshua and remembering they had conquered this territory, and so the place is listed here. And we see it here again in the book of Judges. So it's just kind of interesting to think about these locations, Succoth being one of them. The mention of 2 kings in this section, in the whole chapter, but there's 2 kings that are mentioned, eventually captured, probably points to the alliance between Midian and Amalek. And so, they keep saying the kings of Midian. Why would you have 2 kings? Well, you would have 2 if there was one from Midian and one from Amalek, but you just referred to all the people as the Midianites, right? So there was a guy in the church I served back in Napa, St. John Napa, who was an elderly gentleman way back then when I was a very young pastor, and we would visit their home and sing Christmas carols. And sorry, a whole different. Do you remember that house? Remember how warm it was? Yeah. So anyways, you go in this house, and he served, and I think he said like 5 armies during World War II, because he kept getting conscripted. And I think he lived in Austria. Well, the Germans forced him into he was in the Austrian army, and then he was in the German army, and then he got captured by the English, and then he was back to the Germans, then to the Russians. So not everybody in the German army was German, right? And so not everybody in the Midianite army was a Midianite. Some of them were Amalekites, but because the Midianites were probably the most numerous, if for shorthand, they just call them the Midianite kings. So to reinforce that, Judges 6, verse 3 and 33. Who will read verse 3? John, who will read 33?
Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. I remember we read that.
Yep, you read it right. That's correct.
I mean, earlier.
Oh, yeah. And then verse 33?
Me?
Wayne's got it.
Now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people east came together, and they crossed the Jordan and encamped in the valley of...
So again, just notice there's a couple references. It's the Midianites and the Amalekites. And so they were together on this stuff. Okay. The leaders of Succoth gave an unexpected answer. What's the unexpected answer? No. Now, I mean, the route's on, right? Israel's winning. And you're going to Israelites in Israelite territory. And what's the deal? And I'm sure that's how Gideon felt. What's the problem? We're finally winning. Do you remember how many years these people have oppressed us? Why would you not help us? We're on the warpath. Well, they give an unexpected answer. Why? The people of Succoth live close to the home territory of Midian. I'd love to put a map up here. I didn't think to do that. But the farther south you get, and a little east of the Dead Sea, the farther south you go, the closer you get to the territory of Midian. So the people who lived in Succoth, in that area, the tribe of Gad, I believe it is, they're closer to Midianite territory. So it's harder for them to say, oh, great, we're winning. Sure, we'll help you. Because how do they know this is actually going to come to fruition? How do they know that the Midianites have really been defeated, or maybe just a few thousand soldiers have been killed, and they're going to come up next spring? Remember how they were described in chapter 6, like locusts covering the ground. How do we know this? So you can kind of understand it. And they had suffered for many years along with the rest of the Israelites. So you can understand their lack of enthusiasm.
So the Midianites would not be considered a tribe of Israel then?
No, Midianites are foreign people.
But they're sons of Abraham.
Yes, but they're not Israel. So Abraham has Isaac, but before he has Isaac, he has Ishmael, right? And then actually after Sarah died, he married again and had a bunch more kids.
But Keturah was not an Israelite?
No, I don't believe so. So yeah, so you got these related tribes, but the Midianites are not Israelites. Isn't it fun? Amalekites, Midianites, etc.ites, they're just all over the place, right? Gideon promises to return and thresh the flesh of the people of Succoth. That's the word there that's used. And so threshing is where you separate grain from the stalk of the plant. So you don't think about that much when you're threshing grain, but then you apply that to a human being, that means little pieces are coming off, right? Not very pleasant. So that's his threat. And as we'll see, it's not an empty threat. Now there's also the town of Penuel, and your Bible may spell it Peniel. It's spelled with a U here, and it had alternate spellings. That's just how things are, right? We get all bent out of shape out of that, but towns have very similar spellings. So let's look at Genesis 32, 22 to 32. Who will read that? Tom? Genesis 32, 22 to 32.
He's sure in the right book.
Yeah. Don't have Becky look it up for you in Exodus.
Yeah.
22 what?
22 to 32. 32 to 22.
So here's Jacob. He's just about to meet his brother Esau. He's afraid. He stole, 20 years earlier, he stole the birthright from his brother Esau. We saw earlier at Succoth, he was building pens for his flocks on the way back. Now he's just about to meet his brother, and he's very scared. And let's see how God visits him.
That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God's face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon.
So it's a very significant moment. Jacob encounters God that night, or maybe the other way around, I should say it. And a lot of people think this is the pre-incarnate Christ. So Jesus, before he's born, in a sense, wrestles with Jacob. Interesting, isn't it? But that's a whole other Bible study. So we're not going to talk about that tonight. But very significant place, isn't it? Okay. And so Gideon here doesn't threaten to thresh their flesh, but he threatens their security. I'm going to tear this tower down. And for a town, You would have a wall around your city if it was a large enough dwelling, and then you would often have a tower in the middle of that town, so if the walls were broken, you could go up into the tower and then shoot down upon anybody trying to attack you. And you could hold out and hope for rescue to come from outside. And so he's threatening their security. All right, Judges 8:10-12. The Midianite kings are captured. Let's read those verses, please. Judges 8:10-12. Sue.
Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with a force of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples. 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. Gideon went up by the route of the nomads east of Nobah and Jabbeha and attacked the unsuspecting army. Zebah and Zalmunna, the two kings of Midian, fled, but he pursued them and captured them, routing their entire army.
Okay. So what happens here? Let's take a look. We don't know the exact locations of the places mentioned, but again, it's east of the Jordan and south of the Dead Sea, somewhere in there. The place is so dry and arid, there's just not much left there. The route of the Bedouins is there, and it may be the same today, but that was 3,000 years ago plus. So, it's hard to know exactly where it was. Now, for the Midianites and Amalekites, morale would have been very low after heavy losses. You've got 100 and some thousand soldiers who have been killed. What did it say? 120 was it? Yeah, I mean that's a lot of death, and you've been winning for decades probably. You'd come into Israel every spring and take everything, and then leave. It happened year after year after year the same way, and all of a sudden this devastating defeat, which shouldn't have happened in human terms. And you can maybe kind of see the finger of God in all this, that would be devastating. So morale is very low, and suspicion was very high. Why? What happened in the original battle when the 300 Gideon's men surrounded, broke their clay jars, had the torches, blowing on the horns? What happened in that first battle?
Death and destruction, and then they were routed.
They killed each other.
They killed each other. It says Yahweh threw them into panic, and it says a man against his neighbor took up his own sword. Wow. And so they fought against each other. So now they're fleeing, and so what kind of thoughts would go through your mind as a soldier if you're fleeing and you saw your buddies getting killed by your supposed allies, and now you're fleeing, and there's still a mixture of that? What would you be thinking? Watch your back. You can't trust those Amalekites. You can't trust those Midianites. They set us up. There's no way this would have happened without them setting us up. It's impossible for the Israelites to have done anything. And so 100,000 plus killed, and much smaller force. So they're in a bad way. It's possible that the route of Gideon is mentioned here because it was different from the path of the fleeing Midianites and would provide surprise. Now, again, that's not in the text, so I'm conjecturing here. But why would you mention the route Gideon took? He drove on I-5 and then 50 west. Why would you say that? You wouldn't, unless there was something significant about it back in that day. And if you think about it, I've been reading a book about the Revolutionary War, and when one army lost, they ran. And there would just be this stream of junk, the spoils, the booty of battle, right? Left behind. Wagons and coats and ammunition in the Revolutionary War. And in this war, swords, they're heavy to carry. Extra cloaks, because you can't run fast in them. You're panicking, you're running, you're afraid of dying, you just drop your stuff and go. And so if Gideon was able to take a different route with a small force, he would have come upon them completely unsuspecting, and they would have been scattered. And they may have, again, turned their swords upon each other, again, not trusting who they were with. Once again, panic enveloped the Midianite forces. It says that in the text. So they're panicking. Okay, verses 13 to 17. Ron, go ahead.
Gideon's son Joash then returned from the battle by the pass of the heroes. Caught a young man of Succoth and questioned him. The young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 officials of Succoth, the elders of the town. Then Gideon came and said to the men of Succoth, Here are Zabath and Saluna, about whom you taunted me by saying, do you already have the hands of Zabath and Saluna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your exhausted men? He took the elders of the town and taught the men of Succoth lessons by punishing them.
Would you read that verse again, Ron? I couldn't hear.
He took the elders of the town and taught the men of Succoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. He also pulled down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the town.
Okay. And they all died happily ever after, right? So here Gideon gets some revenge. Gideon is called again the son of Joash, probably to remind us of how far he has come. If you go back and look in chapter 6, and I think Brian was the one who read this earlier, that it says Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing grain in a winepress. That's how he was introduced to us. And so we see him at the beginning of this account, and we see him now toward the very end of it. He's a completely different man. In chapter 6, he's timid, he's afraid, he acts at night, he's afraid of the people in his own town. Now he's out there killing kings of Midian. So he's come a long way. The route of Gideon is mentioned again, Route 66, I guess. And this time he takes Succoth by surprise. And so again, I think that's what he's doing. He finds a kid, or a young man, and he says, write down these names. So obviously, they don't know he's there. They don't know he's coming. He shows up at the town. This section of Judges, and this is very significant. This is probably the most significant thing, or one of the most significant things to remember tonight. It reveals the first Israelite on Israelite violence in the book of Judges. So remember how we've talked about this book spirals down, that the spiritual condition of Israel starts as high as it's going to be with the life of Joshua. Joshua's mentioned a little bit in the first couple chapters. And then we see this ongoing spiral down. The first judge is the best judge, Othniel. He does it right. He marries a believing woman. You know, he follows the Lord, and everything follows the cycle. And then it just gets worse. And so now for the first time in chapter 8, we're seeing violence by Israelite upon Israelite. And like I said, there's no happy end here. It's going to get worse. And by the end of the book, it's awful. It's just awful. And so that's what we'll see. So it's significant to see.
To me, this talks a lot about what happens in war. People come out of war different.
Yeah.
And he came out of war in this battles and took retribution. Just like what happened in the South. There was retribution against the South. And so
Sure.
This is an ongoing cycle throughout history.
And there's some of that, but the book of Judges also has a deeper theological teaching about Gideon. You're absolutely right, Wayne. There's that, but there's also more. And we'll see that next week. I only got to verse 21 this week, so we'll pick up next week. And it's kind of a natural break anyway, so I'm kind of glad I stopped where I did. Because we're going to hear what Gideon does in war, and that'll end tonight. And then starting next week, we'll see what Gideon does in peace, quote unquote peace. And we'll see where he's at spiritually, which probably was influenced by the war, but there's more than that going on. Yep. So Gideon's, I didn't put the apostrophe S there. I think I did on your study guide. Gideon's measured punishment specifically targeted the leaders of Succoth. He found this kid. Hey, kid, write down the names of all the elders in the town. Give them to me. You can just imagine Gideon walking up. He hasn't shaved for days, if he shaved at all. He may not have. And he's bloody, and he's sweaty, and he's tired, and he's really pissed off. And these guys didn't help us. We were starving to death pursuing these Midianite kings on your behalf, by the way. So write down their names. And the kid's like, yes, sir. So that's what he does. But he specifically targets the leaders. The Hebrew word there is often translated princes, like they're like prince and princess. So they are the princes, the leaders of Succoth. But when we get to Penuel, and we don't know if that was true for Penuel or not, it just says he killed the men of Penuel. Could have been all of them. Once he started hacking with the briars and didn't kill them, but isn't it interesting? He goes to Penuel and it escalates and he kills them. Again, we don't know if there was more conversation, if they tried to fight. We just don't know. But it certainly escalates. And what's interesting now, literally, when we're talking about the men of Succoth, it says that he caused the men of Succoth to know. That's the literal translation there. So most translations say, well, you know, the Hebrew verb there means he caused them to know. It means he taught them. And so you get taught them a lesson. That certainly is possible. But one commentator that I was reading today had a very interesting insight that later on when we see civil war in Israel, full-blown civil war, there is a sexual deviancy going on. And in the Bible, as you are aware, the verb to know is used to describe the intimacy of sexual intercourse. And so the author of this one commentary said, you know, this is pointing ahead. This is pointing ahead what's going to happen. So there's these little signs of nothing sexual here, but it's pointing ahead. Yeah, I taught them a lesson, but that lesson wasn't really heard well. And the lesson of, you know, following Yahweh and not the religions. Verse 17 uses the verb to kill or slay, and it is used in every verse from 17 to 21. 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. 5 verses in a row use this verb. That's really significant. And it's introducing this theme of great violence, not just to the story of Gideon, but to the account of Israel in the book of Judges. It's going to get more and more and more violent. All right, 18 to 21, our last 3 verses. John.
Then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men did you kill at Tabor? Men like you, they answered, each one with the bearing of a prince. Gideon replied, those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you. Turning to Jether, his oldest son, he said, kill them. But Jether did not draw his sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. Zebah and Zalmunna said, come, do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength. So Gideon stepped forward and killed them, and took the ornaments off their camels' necks.
It is interesting, and we'll find out why next week. Tune in next week. Okay. So the powerful motivation of Gideon is revealed in verses 18 to 19. When you were reading earlier in this chapter, it talks about he comes to these towns, he comes to Succoth, he comes to Penuel, and remember that one verse, I don't remember which number it is, but it's early in the chapter, and it says they were exhausting and pursuing. Exhausting yet pursuing. Those 2 Hebrew words right at the end of the verse. If you're exhausted, why would you just not stop? Why would you not just quit and say, enough? We've routed them, they're fleeing, good riddance, I'm done with death, goodbye. Here we see now the motivation. When Gideon, what's the question that Gideon asks here?
Who were the people you killed?
Who were the people you killed? Where?
Table.
At Tabor. So if you remember to the map I showed you, remember because I'm recording, I can't go back to previous slides, unfortunately. When I showed you the map, at the top of the map was Mount Tabor, and that's where the Midianites were. And so Gideon is referring to some previous slaying of Israelites by the Midianites. We don't know how long ago this happened. We don't know where. We're not given any specifics. And I've read this account numerous times. I never caught that before. But now we see why Gideon is so upset. Because these blankety-blank Midianites killed my brothers. And I will have my revenge someday.
Off topic a little bit. Can you lay in this map again?
No, because it's recording. Okay. See, normally in a presentation I can zoom around to any slide I want. But because they're being recorded, for whatever reason, it doesn't allow me to do that. I think it's because it's placing the audio on each slide. So
they're running on revenge and justification.
Yep. And again, think about the wars that have taken place in the United States, the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. You know, you killed my brother, or my name is Montego, no, you killed my father. Prepare to die, right? So that's a powerful motivation.
Well, if his 300 were so strong and they're wiping all these people out, if he wanted bread, couldn't he have just taken the bread?
Shouldn't have had to.
Well, and they probably needed to make it. And he's thinking, my guys are tired. If you're not going to give it to us real quick, we got to move on. We got to keep after the Midianites. I don't want to lose those guys. Remember, they killed my brothers. I am not going to lose those guys. They're going to pay for what they did to my family. So that's kind of what's going on in his head, in all likelihood. Isn't it interesting that the Midianite kings make no denials regarding the death of the brothers of Gideon? They don't say, "Oh, no, that wasn't us." In a sense, they kind of have a little bit of swagger. Yeah. He says, "What were the kind of men you killed at Tabor, Mount Tabor?" Well, they were like you. They looked like you. I mean, they're making it very clear. Yeah, they were related to you. They looked just like you. Must have been your brothers. They're not apologetic at all.
No, as a matter of fact, they're kind of arrogant because
Yep.
when the son didn't kill him, he said, if you're a man, come and do it yourself.
That's right. Yeah, and so the Midianites, and you can understand why, right? They had the Israelites under their thumb for how many years? For year after year. It might even say in chapter 6, but I don't remember. But for many years, every spring, they'd come in and just take everything. All those Israelites, they don't know how to fight. It's like they're like the French, right? They don't know how to fight. You remember that joke from the Gulf War? Remember, we could not get the French to help us?
Right.
And it says, how many gears does a French tank have?
One.
It has 6. 1 forward and 5 reverse. Right? So anyways, after you've got a people down for year after year after year, it's like they're no threat. Wimpy Israelites. They don't have the stomach for it. And that's how these Midianite kings are treating Gideon, because they don't think he has the stomach for it. There are subtle clues in chapter 8, verses 18 to 21 regarding kingly authority for Gideon. And again, that's a little hint for what's going to come next. But what are these subtle clues? First of all, the description of his brothers. What do the Midianite kings say? What does the text say?
Like princes.
You have it, Sue? Who were those men? They were
Bearing of a prince.
bearing of a prince. Literally, it says like sons of a king, right? The role of the firstborn son. Come, you're my firstborn. You have the strength of the family. Get up and kill these guys. That's kind of a kingly sort of a way of doing things. And the dialogue between the kings of Midian and Gideon. They talk to him and treat him as the leader of all Israel, even though he's not. He's not. So it's very, very interesting how that goes.
He's the one that's in their face.
He's the one that's in their face. Now, the ornaments from the camels' necks will have a further role, and that is why they are mentioned here. Remember, stuff in the Bible isn't there by accident. And earlier we looked at the names of the places and the route Gideon took. And I was throwing you some conjecture there that maybe it was showing that they went this way, but he went that way, element of surprise. That's just conjecture. But when we look next week at what Gideon does with these ornaments, it won't be conjecture. It's spelled out for us in the text. It's very interesting. Wayne.
My Bible says the crescent ornaments.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think literally the translation is the little moons around their neck. Yeah.
That's nothing to do with Muslims yet.
No, Islam isn't invented, and that's a great word for it, until 600 AD. 600 AD. So that's long, long in the future.
Did Muslims go back to anything like this?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know Islam well enough to know. Yeah.
There is a similarity between what camels wore on them and the representation of that throughout history, really. In leaders of large armies had that stuff on the horses.
Yeah, highly decorated. I mean, you knew who the generals were, right? Because they had the most ornately decorated animals. And again, because I was just reading this book about the Revolutionary War, you knew who the officers were by what they wore. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, it's like, everybody wears camo because we don't want to identify our officers.
Korea and Vietnam had changed.
Yeah, that taught us a few things, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But back then, you knew who the leaders of the armies were by what they wore and by the people around them.
But back home, generals still deck themselves out.
Yes, yeah, they're dress uniforms. Yeah, yeah. And I guess the best way, or a way to say this, is that in the old days, thousands of years ago, you would wear your dress uniforms into battle. They were one and the same. Where today we have the combat uniforms versus the dress uniforms. Questions or comments or thoughts about something tonight? Yeah, David.
Why not use a sword? Why do they gotta use those thorns and stuff?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. So why didn't Gideon kill the men of Succoth because he could have, as he did the men of Penuel. You know, it shows, I think, a little bit of the downward spiral of Gideon's character as well. He just wants him to suffer. I'm not going to kill him. I'm going to torture him. I mean, that was basically torture.
So when he flayed them, they didn't die.
They may have, but it doesn't say that. So yeah, he flayed him out. He took thorns, and I mean, I remember as a kid picking blackberries in the alley behind our house, and you'd put your hand in there, and my mom would say, "Oh, wear a long sleeve shirt," and there were shirts like this. What do those do? You know, back in the day, that's the only kind of long sleeve shirt you had. It's like, well, thanks, Mom. Now it puts a hole in my shirt, and I bleed on my shirt. That's great. But yeah, I think he just wanted him to suffer. He was really, really angry, and my men were suffering, and you didn't help us, so you're going to suffer, and you're going to have scars. You got to remember this, it's going to take weeks for you to heal.
The problem with that is that often, if you let them live, sooner or later, some of them are going to say, we're going to get
Maybe,
it back.
yeah. Some do, some don't. Just never know. Yep. Yeah, I mean, and violence begets violence, right? It just does. It just does.
Shoot them in the head.
Tell them.
And I'll be stopping the video now. Okay.